So we are excited. We have Matt Moyer here today. Matt Moyers is one of our Keiretsu members out of Denver. He works in this space. This is his passion. He sells IP and helps to do that for a variety of different types of companies. And we're excited to have him here and sharing some of that wisdom and knowledge with us as we look at these investment opportunities and really work to be better investors ourselves. So Matt, thank you so much. I'll let you fully introduce yourself. Please feel free to share your screen, and we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Great, thank you guys very much. So I am a 20-year finance investment professional that has been working in the space of intellectual property specifically almost that entire time. So I am a fairly unique individual in terms of how I've dealt with intellectual property. I'm not an attorney and I'm not an engineer. I am only a finance person. So usually when I'm dealing with intellectual property, I'm always working with some sort of subject matter expert. Just a little bit of background on me. I run and operate my own firm called Peak Value IP. This Peak Value IP specifically specializes in IP monetization, IP valuation, IP strategy, and in some cases litigation funding. Over the course of my time doing all this IP, I've become an investment banker as well, and I'm actually on a platform called Weild Co. And I describe it as a Uber for investment bankers. So we've got about 80 investment bankers on our platform. Most of them are kind of nearing the end of their careers and have left large bulge bracket firms so that they can work independently on their own without all the bureaucracy that comes with a big firm. So Weild Co takes care of my FINRA registrations, and it also gives me the flexibility. So if I'm working with a small company that has a strong patent portfolio or a meaningful set of brands, something along those lines, and they want me to first value it and then next help them raise capital on it or maybe sell it, right? All of those things are different because patents and trademarks and copyrights are assets and not investment tools. They aren't overseen by FINRA. So I walk a very fine line with what I can do in terms of brokerage versus capital raising. And so most of my clients at this point in time are either very early stage companies or on the other side of the equation, the Fortune 50. So I've done work with Microsoft, AT&T, HP, Google, Facebook, across the board in some way, shape, or form. Over the last 5 years, I've worked with those companies in a patent valuation capacity or some other IP strategy. So as I go through this, if anyone has questions, feel free to speak up and I'll keep my eyes on it. I think one of the things that I've learned in my time with intellectual property is there is no one case fits all. It's very dependent on the specifics of an individual company. And a lot of times, very sadly, people mix up the three primary legally protected IP assets, which is patents, trademarks, and copyrights, right? And all three of those are the primary legally protected assets where you go to a US government or some type of government office to register it. Other non-IP assets that are direct would be contracts, customer lists. Sometimes these things can or can't be transactable, but then there's a lot of non-IP assets such as economies of scale, distribution, reputation, and goodwill. So I've dealt with IP across all of those, from a post-M&A sale transaction to helping companies raise capital to the long in the tooth startup company that has a patent portfolio and for some reason or another wasn't able to monetize that or commercialize it. And so the last thing they're sitting on is the patents or the trademarks, and they're asking me to help them figure out how to monetize it. So I'll figure out whether or not it's possible to license it, to sell it, anything along those lines. A lot of times either inside or outside of bankruptcy. So I've kind of learned about the entire continuum of intellectual property, and that has served me well, because now part of the reason that I joined the Keiretsu forum is because I kept seeing myself on the back end of startups, right? And every startup, when you're going into your initial beginning, you've got all the excitement and you're looking to take over the world, but the reality is the vast majority of startups are not going to succeed, and a higher portion are going to get up to a certain level and plateau, and only a small segment is going to make it into that stratosphere and become a very large organization, a unicorn, if you will. And so by joining the Keiretsu forum, what I'm hoping to do is talk to more early stage companies and more investors to help them set IP strategy early, so that if it gets into the higher percentage of companies that don't quite make it, that there are recoverable assets, right? And the most recoverable assets at the end of the day are going to be your legally protected assets, not your indirect ones, not the contracts that expire or can be canceled, not the reputation or the goodwill. It's going to be your legally protected. Now, that said, patents has been the place where I've dealt with the most. I've dealt a lot with trademarks as well, particularly in the areas of valuing or licensing, as well as copyrights in the context of licensing or bankruptcy. But patents is the real tricky one. And about 10 years ago, the American Invents Act became the law under Obama in 2011. And then in 2013, more pieces of that became true. So what has happened in intellectual property, particularly patents, is that we are in a very weak regime for intellectual property and patents. And for startup organizations, investing in patents is not necessarily something I would recommend unless you have a very significant amount of capital to put into a wide number of patents. If you're going to get a single patent, maybe 2 patents, it's probably better to look into trade secrets, honestly. And when you're doing trade secrets, the way that you protect that is through copyrights, right? So you're trying to keep it protected, you're trying to keep it secret. If you get invited into one of the big tech companies or some billion-dollar company, then they're promising you overtures of funding and licensing and all of these things. Check your NDA closely. Make sure that that you're protected with your intellectual property. Make sure that they don't have some provision in there that says, if we remember it, we can use it, because then they'll steal it. And I've seen it 1,000 times. It is a very tough time in the space of technology IP for early stage companies. So that's my warning to you. Now, when I think of intellectual property, right, it's a 3-legged stool. There's the finance portion, which is always underappreciated. There's the IP portion, the law portion, legal, which is where you're going to first confront this as a startup. You're going to reach out to an IP attorney. You're going to see what you need to get protected. And then there's the technology, the marketing, and the data components. And that's, usually what your ultimate bread and butter is. My entire point of showing all 3 of these on the slide is that you can't just think about one without thinking about the other. You've got to keep all 3 of those things in mind when you're developing your IP strategy, or you're going to run into issues down the road where you're not going to be able to monetize your IP, or you're going to have a legal issue, or if it's in the case of patents, somebody already invented it, or you didn't license in what you needed to. All of those things are very important. So that's kind of it in a nutshell with regards to a high level disaggregation of IP. Then on top of that, right? So when you're an early stage company, your primary issue is, let's get the patent, let's get the protection, and let's use it to protect us from people who might steal it, or be able to go out and license it. But it's a lot more than that, right? So you've got your individual three-legged stool, but then through that, you also have changing patent laws and regulations that are happening all the time. It's a pace and speed of technical engineering that is going faster than at any point in human history. You have patent and IP market conditions that are favorable to the largest of companies and not to the smallest of entities. And it undermines valuation. It changes your transactions and your strategy, and then it all cycles back around again because it's a constant moving thing. And so, all of these things that I'm talking about are usually things that are in the back of early stage companies' minds, but not something that comes to the forefront very often until there's a triggering event that requires you to think about your intellectual property. And so by bringing some of these things a little bit more to the forefront, when those triggering events happen, you'll have more options in terms of what you can do to leverage your IP in the right ways. And so, that's part of the reason I said, like I said, I came and joined the Keiretsu Forum, is just to bring this a little bit more to the forefront. So shades of IP strategy for the businesses, right? There's really four, and this is from a former IP attorney who was at Microsoft and is now a European partner. He came up with four shades of IP. There's the freedom to operate, which is down here in the bottom. This is what most small companies think about when they're thinking about their intellectual property. The freedom to operate, where they won't get bugged, they won't get sued, they just want to run their business. Cost advantage is where you're now developing intellectual property that makes you cheaper or gives you a higher margin or allows you to sell higher, get more, grow market share. And that can happen across technology, it can happen across trademarks and branding. And then the next level is differentiation, which is something where you're actually setting yourself apart in terms of developing IP that starts to move into foundational related IP. And that's the one place where I would say, as an early stage company, if you have foundational intellectual property, which that means if you do a prior art search for anything invented in that space, that it is very hard to find something, then that will, and you think it's going to be foundational change going forward, and it's a hardware related invention, then absolutely patent it. But if it's software, trade secret, right? And copyrights, unless there's something very, very novel. So those are kind of the thought processes of when you should do that. And then the fourth level of IP strategy is monetization. And this is the Qualcomm model, right? Qualcomm, Texas Instrument, even places like Disney, right? They own so much intellectual property that licensing their IP is their primary business, right? And to get to that point, you need to have a very significant level of IP. Qualcomm has over 100,000 patents globally, right? IBM does as well. Most of those companies that will be buying patents in this market are looking for patent portfolios that are in the 50 plus asset level. If it's a single patent, it's very hard to find a buyer now. So really think about your IP strategy. And just to kind of prove this out, right, here is the patent brokerage market from 2011. This is about the time that I fully jumped into the patent and intellectual property markets. And you can see in red here, this is the volume of patent transactions since the 2011. It's increasing, but what it doesn't say is the pricing has been going down, and the amount here in blue available for sale dwarfs what is actually transacted significantly. And if you are looking to sell your intellectual property or your patents, most buyers in today's market are not going to buy your patents unless you have something called evidence of use, which is a technical and legal term for showing that your patent actually is being utilized in the marketplace by someone who's commercialized a product or a service, right? It's basically the type of document you would take in to sue someone for stealing your IP. So you need to do that just to transact your patents these days. That's why it's a weak patent regime right now. So I will stop there. I loaded a lot on you guys and see if you guys have any questions.